Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being here for our final collaborative court speaker series of 2023. I have the very special privilege to have three officers from the Northern District of California who I've worked with in different capacities through our collaborative courts to kind of share their experience from an officer's perspective about the importance of their skill development, their role in the collaborative court, and how it's really helped them grow professionally. The reason that we do these collaborative court speaker series are really to try to bring in some very specialized expertise to help our courts learn the true intricacies of collaborative courts. And so today I'm going to ask each of our three panelists to introduce themselves briefly, talk a little bit about their experience in the collaborative court, and then we'll move into some questions and kind of host this panel. So today we have Katrina Chu, Jennifer Hutchings, and Jennifer James here to help us host and kind of share their expertise in the collaborative courts. So to get started, Jenny, so I'll go Jenny for Jennifer James, Jennifer for Jennifer Hutchings, and then Katrina, just to try to be clear for our panelists. But Jenny, why don't we go ahead and start with you to just kind of give a little bit of background on yourself and your experience with collaborative courts.
Sure. My background with collaborative courts started when I was actually even before I was a county probation officer in San Francisco. So years and years ago, late 90s, we had a drug court in San Francisco County. And I worked for an organization that supported that court. So was very familiar with it. Then became very involved in the treatment, the places that we contract with to provide treatment for our clients federally, started becoming involved with the procurement of those services about 2003, and supervised, actually almost my whole career, supervised people who had treatment needs. And so in 2010, about maybe 2009, the federal system, Northern District California, said, hey, we want to try to get this off the ground here in our district. And so I was approached by Judge Beeler and Sean Halbert, who was a federal public assistant federal public defender at the time, and they came and we sat in my office and said, how can we get this going? I was only involved for about a year, and I think later in our questions we'll get to in part why that was. It was a very heavy lift, and we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. And I'm pleased to say that I think that things are more streamlined, and now we just have a better idea of how to run something more efficiently. So that's my background with collaborative courts.
Great, thanks so much, Jenny. And just really quickly, can you talk about just what your current position is?
Sure, I'm the deputy chief over the supervision division in Northern District, California. So oversee supervision.
Thank you so much. And so we'll move over to Jennifer. And Jennifer has a very special place in my professional career. She was the very first officer that I worked with when I joined the Northern District of California. Learned so much about supervision, how to talk to participants, and really gave incredible perspective. And thank you so much for being here, Hutch. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience in the collaborative courts and your role as an officer?
Of course, Wyatt, thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you everyone for having me today. I spent 7 years working with the reentry court program, many of those with Wyatt. That was from early 2012 to June of 2019. So those were 7 years that I really enjoyed the partnership that I had with the court, with the collaborative courts team, and I learned a tremendous amount during that time. I'm currently a supervisory probation officer over supervision in San Francisco in the Northern District.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And so we'll kind of talk about transition a bit more in a little bit. But why don't we move over to Katrina and talk a little bit about your experience with the court.
So I've been an officer since 2015, and I started working with the collaborative courts in 2015 when the Conviction Alternatives Program began. So I was asked, or my chief at the time asked if anybody was willing to volunteer. I was a fairly new officer, but always knew that I wanted to be involved in the treatment realm of supervision. So several of the members of my family have been affected by addiction and mental illness. And as a child, I knew how that impacted our family dynamic. So the CAP program seemed to be the perfect opportunity for me to help defendants and their families, providing resources to really just break the cycle of addiction. And so that's why I volunteered for the program. I was in the CAP program in San Francisco for almost 5 years. I then transferred to probation in 2020, right when the pandemic hit. And I am currently a supervisor in the pre-sentence division in San Francisco.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that background, Katrina. And so very interesting experience, right? Where we met each other when we were working in pretrial services. Just for everyone's background, CAP is our conviction alternatives program, where it's a drug court model, and it's a pre-entry court or a pretrial. So it's a post-plea pre-adjudication court, very similar to the drug court model, very similar to the structure of our reentry court. So thank you both. Just to give some background for anyone in the audience who may not be familiar, but so much of the work in our collaborative courts falls on the officers, right? Not only are they doing standard supervision, but they're also kind of coordinating, collaborating, providing up-to-date information about relapse, new criminal conduct, in addition to all the behaviors that they're identifying, continuing to do home visits, work visits, a lot of the hard work of supervision. And so, Jennifer, why don't we start with you, where you can talk a little bit about balancing the additional requirements for people on supervision in the reentry court program, and what kind of your approach was to manage your time as an officer working in the collaborative court.
Of course, thanks. It wasn't always easy. I will definitely say that. While we would love for, a reentry court officer to hopefully have a reduced caseload, and now we are able to do that. Back in the 7 years that I had it, that was a challenge. I had a pretty full caseload. At any given time, we had upwards of 16 people in reentry court when we had our most full time in the program. And definitely standard supervision was in effect, but they definitely required a lot more of my time. Being able to work with them a lot closer. The judges were working with them. All of the entities in the reentry court were very invested in their success and what we needed to do to get them there. The addition of you, Wyatt, was so helpful to us because you were a resource for them, a resource to help guide us with more community options for them, whether it be employment or housing. So to be able to work collaboratively with you was a huge help to the whole system and how we were able to benefit the clients that we had in the reentry court. The probation office has always supported the reentry court program, so that's always been extremely helpful. But definitely it's an additional work. It's additional workload that an officer is committing to. But usually they feel very passionate about what it is they're doing and what the program represents, what the program can accomplish. And so it's definitely an extra task worth taking on.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I'll move over to Katrina quickly, because in your introduction, you described being a fairly new officer when you started in your collaborative court. Can you talk a little bit about the skills that you needed to be successful as an officer in the collaborative court?
Yeah, sure. So I was very new. I really counted on my supervisor at the time to really help me and guide me in supervising the clients. They're all high risk and high needs. So they're suffering from severe mental health or substance addiction. They're in various treatment programs. They're in on-location monitoring, halfway houses. So I think some of the skills that an officer needs to be successful in the program is really be able to communicate effectively, have a strong sense of boundaries, and really believe in change. And that's some of the things that Jennifer touched upon. really your time is spent, they're calling you at all hours of the night, all hours of the day. They either want to tell you what's really, really working for them and, you know, how proud they are of whatever they did at that time, or they're coming to you to find solutions for them very quickly. And so you kind of feel like you have 20 to 30 children on your caseload where you're supporting them, you're trying to provide them a lot of great feedback, but also hold them accountable. And being a new officer, that was extremely difficult for me. So I had to learn very quickly. I used to provide everybody my cell phone number and I stopped. I was like, okay, if it's an emergency, you can leave a message on my voicemail and I'll receive it. But strong boundaries is something that you definitely need to have. You have to be willing to hold somebody accountable. If you're only supporting them and not being able to tell them, you know, hey, this is what you did wrong, but let's correct it, you're really not doing anything great for them. And there's not a lot of success for them because they're just learning to do the same thing they've done their entire lives. So a lot of our clients have never been held accountable throughout their lives. They've never really had a parent to say no or provide them some discipline. So that's a huge job in our supervision world to be able to have to do that for them.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. I think the idea about kind of balancing accountability and agency with the people going through the programs is one of the challenges that we deal with constantly, right? Where our goal in these collaborative courts is to get people confident in their lives, safe in the community, building the skills to be successful without supervision. But kind of like what Katrina was describing, sometimes the skill hasn't been taught at all, right? So it's the first time that we're really introducing this. And so, Jenny, I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts about the balance between accountability and providing treatment for these participants. So very big question, I know, because it's not just kind of one need that we're addressing, right? It's usually some type of substance use issue, but we also have health diagnoses, pro-social behaviors that we're looking to change. But tell me a little bit about balancing treatment components and assessments with accountability of supervision.
Well, so what I would say is that it can be difficult, right? So this may come as a surprise to some people, but with the federal government, when you're giving money to providers to provide treatment, you're going with the lowest priced, technically acceptable. That doesn't mean that sometimes the treatment isn't phenomenal, but sometimes it's less than phenomenal. You're really depending on, you're not providing the treatment, right? So your control over it is almost non-existent. You can say, hey, these are their dynamic risk factors. We want you to focus on that. But is it actually happening in sessions? I'm not sure. So I think that my experience was so early on in the federal. So when I first started, we didn't have the treatment provider come. That I would basically bring to the team, hey, this is what the treatment provider is saying. So it was sort of a little game of telephone, right? We didn't have someone there to, so we've learned as we've gone along. And I feel like sometimes to hold someone, it's a little bit hard to say, hey, you said, like, it's better to have the provider there that can say, hey, remember when you shared this with me, or this is one of the things that you're working on, and then share it. You want everyone to be hearing the same information at the same time. Otherwise, it leads to splitting, and I mean, stuff that's, so, you know, I would say, I mean, accountability, wow, sometimes, are you asking more about like holding them accountable to being honest, to showing up, to trying to follow your conditions, to...
Yeah, so I think you're bringing up a really good question, and I should make a distinction, right? So we have supervision, right? There are standard terms of condition that officers use as a starting process, right? And then we also have the program requirements. And so our basis for all of our collaborative courts is show up, try, and be honest. And so maybe kind of talking about the distinctions between how that's separated, right? It oftentimes folds over, but there's a difference between being a probation officer and then supervision in the reentry court a bit.
Absolutely. So we certainly are trying, no matter who you're supervising, you're hoping to develop a rapport with that person and provide an environment where they feel like they can be honest, especially if it's, you've got a standard condition that you not possess or use drugs, but you did. And it can feel, I think, it's not normal for them to come to court and say, hey, I used, and sometimes to receive support around that, right? That the first thing coming out of the judge's mouth is not like, flash incarceration. Instead, it's like, I'm really glad that you were honest with us. Thank you for that. So I think that that's huge. So that isn't, it's not typical and it's not normal. We do. So, but I would say that even the show up, try and be honest is something that evolved over time. So in the beginning, I would say, but they keep testing positive, or like, what are we were so wrapped up at the time and like, what are our sanctions? What are our incentives? And I think over time it evolved into like meeting someone where they are and realizing that everything really has to be individualized. Right? You could have one person who's testing positive for marijuana, but methamphetamine was their drug of choice. And that is a huge success for them. Mm-hmm. And that might not be the same for someone who's used marijuana their whole life and is still using marijuana. So individualizing the approach, I think, is big, and being flexible and where you can. I mean, the nice thing about where we are probation officers in the Northern District of California is that there's an emphasis on treatment and understanding that relapse is a part of recovery. And so you're not going to be flash incarcerated for testing positive in most circumstances. If you're not a risk to the community, we're going to try to work with you. So I think it's a huge plus to being here.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of that is science and research that we try to utilize, right? The public health or kind of medical model where we're trying to work with all staff about kind of understanding the challenges of addiction, right? And how it's very time intensive, where change doesn't just instantly happen, right? It's a very long scope. And so, Jennifer, I'll kind of move over to you, because one of my favorite anecdotes, right, is that in the first year that we worked together, I remember a participant coming into court and telling a very interesting or wild story that didn't seem too plausible about why they used, right? It wasn't an admission. It was really just I put my hand under a car door and I felt something, and then I scratched my cheek and I'm testing positive all of a sudden, right? And Jennifer, I remember you looking this person straight in the eye and just saying, I don't believe you, right? And let's kind of talk through the real challenges. And that's one of the goals of the collaborative courts, where, we understand kind of it's why would anyone come to a courtroom and admit use, right? Why would they come to their officer? But that's really the big change, where if we can have honest conversations about the needs that have to be addressed, then we can really talk about them. So Jennifer, maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of this individualized approach that you have to learn in the collaborative courts when working with your officers, and how you kind of develop that skill set to build rapport, to understand substance use, and again, kind of tying back into the accountability, what your professional development led to about really working and improving the outcome for the client.
I would say, yeah, honesty is, it's probably one of the things that our clients do struggle with the most. Just various things about their life, especially if they've navigated addiction. Telling stories becomes second nature. And I would say, early in my career, I didn't really know how to navigate that. I would say reentry court helped me learn how to navigate that. The nice thing, and probably my favorite thing about reentry court, was that everyone who had a seat at the table, the reentry court panel, was equal, and that included with our two judges. No one was divided based on their role. No one was divided based on this person's a judge or this person's not. Everyone had an equal seat at the table and an equal right to have a conversation at the table. And while we didn't always agree on how to handle clients, everything was done with respect. And I think we all would say we learned a lot about each other, about each other's roles, about how our interactions are with people. So that carried over into the interactions with the clients. So we would come to the meetings as a very united front. Even the public defender, the public defender at the time, she was more interested in how can I help you, right? Not trying to, oh, let's win against these other people. It is, how can I help you? How can all of us work together to help you? And the fact that we had that relationship with each other translated into the success of the court, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, anyone who's ever worked with me knows that I am a straight shooter. And if I say I don't believe you, it is going to be a direct, I don't believe you. And that conversation happened a lot. And eventually a lot of the court would say, I don't believe you. And in getting them to come around to having an honest communication, it's okay to tell someone you don't believe them. And then the next step is to explain to them how you can help them once you get to the truth. I can't help you if you're not being honest. I can't help you. I don't know what I'm working with. But if you're honest with me, then I know what I'm working with, and we can put together next steps. So I would say I had tremendous growth during those 7 years in just learning to communicate with my peers, our other stakeholders, communicate with the clients. But yeah, it's definitely a setting where the clients have to be accountable. There's going to be no success in the court. And it's not fair to the individuals who are doing the work to not hold individuals who are not accountable for that. So it's a balance. I mean, it definitely is walking a tightrope when you're dealing with so many different entities, so many different personalities, many people at different stages of recovery, putting them all together in this group. But you'd be surprised how tight-knit the group becomes. Right. The clients tend to communicate with each other long after reentry court is over. We become a support system for each other. They get immersed in each other's lives, their families. So it's taking kind of a subsection of folks on supervision and putting them in this tight-knit group, in this tight-knit program that is very focused on their needs. I mean, probation's focused on their needs, but they have a tighter support system than anyone else does, and they have the benefit of that. Some of them take advantage of it, some of them do not. But it's nice that we can offer it because the outcomes have shown that it does go a long way to not reoffending, right. And even sometimes completely kicking substance abuse, which is so hard to do.
So difficult, right? I mean, we're talking years and years of sobriety that's required, and our collaborative courts are not 10-year programs, right? They're 12 to 18 months in most cases. Even terms of supervised release generally are 3 to 5 years. And so when we see science that says sobriety doesn't really become less of an issue until 8 years of sobriety, right? We have a lot of work to do to kind of build foundational habits. And so kind of talking about accountability, Jennifer, right? It's kind of this really interesting concept where the participants are actually looking at us to hold them accountable without saying that, right? And so when they're pushing up against the wall, kind of trying, I don't want to say full manipulation, right? But see what they can get away with, right? They're almost asking us to hold them accountable. And so it takes kind of that straight shot, right? I don't believe you when you just said this. And so it's really fascinating approach, and I think skill set that officers develop very quickly, right? Because officers are learning how to speak to clients, but also the judges in a very informal setting, and identify these different behaviors. So through our collaborative courts, right, we have success, and that's generally a certain amount of sobriety. It's completing 4 phases of the program. It's having all these different ideas or these different program requirements, but I want to talk about success a little bit. And so kind of removing the client success. Katrina, I'll start with you. How did you define your own success when you're working in the program?
Yeah, so I think that's a 2-part question, or 2-part answer for me, at least. For me, while I was in the program, success for me meant change. So seeing somebody change, even if it's their attitude, their behavior, their thought process, the way they responded to you initially and the way they respond to you now, that was success. A lot of people define success as sobriety. Sobriety to me is not, sobriety is long-term success, but within the program, it's not a success to me, because in order to maintain sobriety, you have to change so many different things. A lot of our participants are using because of what they've been through or the different situations they've encountered in life. And so it's a coping mechanism for them. And so if we can teach them how to cope in a different way than resulting to drug use, by changing their behaviors, changing the way they're thinking, for me, that was success. Changing the way that they showed up for their families, that they showed up for court, showed up for each other. The second part, I think, after being out of the CAP program for several years now, it's just feeling the success for me is feeling how impactful that program really was for me. And while you're in it, it's just the day-to-day grind. It's you're so entrenched in their lives and what's going on and the next violation or the next goal that they've met. And so it's so hard to like sit back and say, wow, that's such a great program. This is such, there's so much success out of the program. Now that I've been out of it for a few years, I can say, wow, every single person in that program, every participant has had success. Whether they relapsed right after they completed the program, or they're now, completing college or obtaining degrees and getting these nice career jobs, all of that is success for me. We just put so much effort and energy into the program on the daily basis. And so it's so nice. I think I recently received an envelope from a mom from a couple years ago for a client that was in the program. And the letter said, "Thank you so much for believing in my son." And that was probably, I saved it, I kept it because I felt like that was so impactful. If we can do that just for a couple of people, it's so impactful. And I'm just so happy to see that the rest of the United States is joining on board and more programs are being opened because of it.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Katrina. And Jenny, I'll move over to you in kind of a similar sense as you oversee supervision with the officers that are working in the reentry courts. How do you as an administrator of probation define success, or kind of how officers are supervising in the collaborative court programs? Let's get you off mute real quick, Jenny.
Sorry, I would say that it is trying to move the supervision of all of our clients to a model like that. So we don't have the infrastructure to be able to provide everyone with a reentry court. But what we do have is, I think what this showed me was really collaboration can even be on small scale, right? Collaboration can mean you're struggling to work with a client or struggling to have a client be compliant with something that you're asking from them. Bring the public defender in, have a meeting and really try to utilize everything you have available if you're going to court, and feel confident speaking up and saying, Your Honor, this may not be the kind of success that we were all hoping for, but it is it is success to this person. So I think it's taking I can remember being in reentry court, and then slowly some of the judges would start creating their own, setting progress status reports or progress appearances. And that was big, right? It was taking part of the model, which is, that the judge's involvement is really going to make an impact. And so I think that it's seeing it from my level now. It's like, how can we take bits and pieces of it and incorporate it into our supervision of everyone else?
Great. Yeah, there's this effect, right? And I think both Jennifer and Katrina have talked about just how it works on standard supervision, right? There's kind of this skill that you develop that works not just for collaborative court clients, but across supervision as a whole. So that's incredible, right? And I think it's education across the board where all the agencies at the table are really learning what the true supervision looks like, right? And so we know that for the most part, right, when clients come to the court sessions, right, sometimes they come up in their suit and tie, right? They're dressed to impress. They're always sitting at the front of the seat or at the edge of their seat, becoming very engaged with the judge. But the officers see them in a very different light. and see them through highs and lows, through challenges. And so, Jennifer, I'll go back to you. We can just briefly talk about kind of that difference, right? So the court participant, right, and then the participant in the community that's working on things. How do you kind of let the collaborative court team know when we may see a difference in their behavior, and how do we address those challenges?
We used to always meet before every court appearance, and I think that was essential. That was the time that the team really broke down what was going on with each individual client. It wasn't perfect. We definitely, over the years, over the 7 years I had it, we had individuals who I knew were actually committing new crimes. So they were by day committing new crimes, new criminal conduct, and then once every other week, they're coming into court and trying to sell a different story. So that, I would say, is where my collaboration came in, as far as being open and honest with the reentry court team about what was really going on with this person. And there were a couple instances where actually we removed someone because we knew things were going on. It wasn't conducive to what we were trying to do. It wasn't conducive to the other participants. And so we had to make the hard decision that this person could no longer be part of this program, that their appearance there was detrimental based on what we knew they were doing. And it was not using drugs, it was new criminal conduct. And that definitely, came into play at times. So I would say the role of the probation officer has to be that open and honest vessel of communication. A reentry court probation officer cannot be afraid to have a conversation with a judge that you would have with anyone else. To say it how it is and to have that open and honest conversation. And I'd say for some, that's probably not the easiest. And it's not something that sometimes just happens. Sometimes you have to work on that and get up to the comfort level of everyone is equal at that table, including the judges, in the sense of what you're there to accomplish. And having those open and honest communications with everyone involved is only going to help the clients, but I definitely say the probation officer has to shoulder a lot of that. They're dealing with this person 24/7 versus coming to court every other week, for an hour. And that's the extent of interaction. Now, when we added the treatment provider coming, that was also a huge component that brought a lot of clarity to things. Having the person there who was actually meeting with them, who would also hold them accountable in a really great way, would hear them say something in group and go, that's not accurate. Like, let's have some real conversations. So, over the years, we evolved, we changed different things, we added different things, all with the common goal of just having that open and honest communication. And it really became, especially for at least for me, that reentry court family became a family. I mean, I have extremely close relationships to this day with everyone that was in that program, from the judge, the public defender, the AUSA, because we just became this unit of one that had a common goal. It didn't matter what agency you were with. And those relationships carry on to this day, and I wouldn't have them if it wasn't for that program.
Right. Great. So I want to have the audience just kind of prepare questions, because in about 10 minutes, we're going to kind of open it up for Q&A. But there's two things that I want to get through before we move into that portion. I noticed the three of you have been specialists or supervisors and kind of earned promotions in the agency, which is incredible. And don't want to pretend that the collaborative court is the only reason that you did that, but you all have a lengthy experience working in kind of this collaborative setting. And so not really addressed to anyone, but anyone feel free to start a question. But how do you think the work and the skills you develop in collaborative courts have helped you just professionally to earn your promotions, and what skills from the collaborative courts have led to your success in your new role?
I'll go first. I think a lot of it is what we've kind of touched upon, right? Our effective communication skills, being able to problem solve quickly and effectively. I know, at least for me, the collaborative courts matured me professionally very quickly. It's not every day that you're sitting at a table with 2 federal judges and they're willing to hear what you have to say and what your opinion is. And so being able to articulate yourself in a way that's professional, but you're also getting your point across from your position, your goal as an officer. I think something that just came up for me that was huge is, I remember with Judge Corley, I was receiving location monitoring alerts at 2 in the morning, and I told the team, and Judge Corley looked at all the participants and said, if Katrina's waking up at 2 a.m., I'm waking up at 2 a.m. And so that created, at least in my opinion, is that solid feeling of confidence in what I do and my abilities to do my job. And that's carried on for me. I'm not somebody that won't ask a question because I'm scared, but being able to have that confidence and comfortability with a judge or judges was huge for me. And so to walk into a room full of judges, it's extremely difficult for many of us. But the collaborative courts provided that avenue for us to feel comfortable, to have that intimate friendship and relationship with our counterparts in different agencies. And like Jennifer Hutchings said, it's a family. You develop a very close relationship. And I think it helped me tremendously with where I am today. Professionally, I've learned to communicate much better. I've understood the different routes of supervision, of investigation, and really, like I said, problem solving skills. It's not something that you can learn quickly, but the collaborative courts, you have to figure out a way to problem solve for our clients to be able to help them be successful. So yes, that's what my thoughts are on that.
Great. Jenny, any thoughts?
I guess I would just say, so it was so long ago that I participated, but I will say that I do not believe that our chief at the time was quite on board with participating. So for me, it was a difficult position to be in, right? Where he'd be saying, you need to tell them we're not going to do that, or, and then I would go, and then I would want to pacify everyone in the room. And it certainly is easier when you have an administration that's supportive of what you're trying to do. I think that for me, I was able to see everyone's role, right? Like the public defender at the time, I can remember a client who had, I don't know, missed something and then brought us a note from San Francisco General saying he had been there all day. And I immediately was like, no doctor signs their name and doesn't put MD after the end. So I think it's forged. And it turned out it was. And watching Ron Tyler at the time kind of struggle with like, I'm recognizing exactly what happened here, and this isn't normally my role. It was being able to see judges as people, right? And being able to see how it was a struggle for them to maybe not realize maybe right away when someone was being dishonest. So really I don't know, I feel like I was able to see everything from different lenses. And certainly where I am now, it helps me when we collaborate on anything, right? To look at it from different perspectives and really like do we share a common goal here? And if we do, how do we work together to get there? So I would at least say that when I was the officer in reentry court, I was intimidated. I did not have confidence. There were times that I'd go and maybe want to say something and didn't quite say it the way I would have liked to have. And then later I watched my friend Jennifer Hutchings go, no, I just tell them like it is. And what is great is that today I feel very differently. Like if a judge was asking for something, certainly we work for them and I would want to get to yes, however I could, but I would also feel comfortable saying, hey, there's an obstacle here. And I want to make sure that I've brought this to your attention. And is there some way we can kind of I don't know, the confidence. I would say confidence and working together as an entire criminal justice system, you know, within the building. So that's what helped me, I think.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Jenny. Jennifer, any thoughts to add?
No, I actually give the collaborative courts a lot of credit in, my development. 7 years is, I think, the longest that I believe a probation officer so far has been in the program. And it was where I belonged. The team felt very strong that I stayed, and it definitely developed me in all of the ways that Katrina and Jenny just mentioned, from personal development to professional development. Being able to work with so many stakeholders in what we do, understanding different roles, being able to communicate effectively, not being afraid to communicate, which no one has ever accused me of that. It definitely got me, I think, to where I am today, which is, being able to effectively communicate with officers that I supervise, who then in turn supervise huge caseloads of clients. So it's still within the same realm. It's just affecting change at a different level.
Great, great. So amazing answers. Have one more kind of difficult question to ask all of you in the 4 or 5 minutes that we have left. But one of my observations for the collaborative court is that we really learn kind of process in each agency that's involved, right? So how lawyers approach the case, what they identify as far as facts, how they work with different clients. But in maybe 30 seconds, what would you as an officer want the court to know about the workload, the attention, the energy it takes to be a successful officer in the collaborative court setting? Jennifer?
Okay, I guess it's going to be me. I think the more participants in the court, meaning from the side of the judges, public defenders, attorneys, understand the role of probation and how much probation contributes, I think that's important. I think it's easy sometimes as a judge, as a chief, as a leader of any agency, if you're not familiar, to just be like, I want this done, and I would like this, and I think I'd like that in this as well, which is great. But if you don't understand the tasks of the person you're asking that of, and what they deal with on a daily basis, of course, they want to say yes, they want to appease you, whatever it is that you would like. But I think it can be difficult sometimes to say to someone, well, I love that you are so excited about these 7 programs that you would like us to involve our clients in. I'm only one person and I only have so much time in the day. So to not have to say that, right, for judges or whoever is running the court to really take the time to get to know probation, get to know what we do, get to know what our challenges are. I think that type of understanding will make expectations realistic and make for a more collaborative relationship if everyone just takes the time to understand, despite what the wants are, what someone's capabilities might be, and try to work out a formulated plan to get everyone what they want while still being considerate and mindful of what everyone has on their plate.
Great. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Jenny, anything to add?
I think so. We didn't have a Wyatt when I was in the reentry court. We had a Megan Wallstrom, and what's funny was, looking back now, that was such a godsend to have somebody who could do the things that I didn't have the time to do. I can recall Judge Beeler, Judge Spiro, somebody wanted someone in our program to get dental work done, and it was so overwhelming at the time, as I'm thinking, I have 50 other cases, I have other court appearances, and I will do my best to try to find this. I don't know how we'll pay for it. I don't know how. It was a lot. And so I think that also what we've talked about is programmatically things have changed. And like now in cap courts, we're trying to get social workers involved. But really, don't say no. If anyone wants to volunteer or come or help, like we can use, I remember thinking, well, that's my job, but they're asking Megan to do it. And what does that make it look? Does it make it look like I'm not doing my part? It was a struggle. And today I would say, bring it on. Megan, come help do as much as you want to do. We need you. We love you. So I think to piggyback on what Jennifer said.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, and a special shout out to Megan Wallstrom, who's been great and a wonderful colleague, very involved in back to our collaborative courts. Katrina, any final closing thoughts before we open up for questions?
Yeah, I would just add that it would be really, really nice to define not just our roles in terms of our professions, but the role within the dynamic of the team. And so I know I felt like I was the heavy, and the officers generally the heavy. We're the ones that are violating people on our caseloads. And so sometimes it was such a relief when the judge or even a defense attorney stood up and said, no, this behavior is not acceptable. And so just making sure that everybody's aware that it doesn't only have to be the officer or the judges, because sometimes certain conversations are so much more important that somebody else says it than me. So if it's a defense attorney that's holding their client or another client accountable, it goes such a long way. And so just, I think that's an important factor to think about.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think it works twofold, right? When we get the prosecutor or the judge kind of giving praise about doing well, it's kind of this enlightening moment where the participant really buys into the program. So thank you so much for sharing all that. I think we have a couple minutes for questions. I think the best way to do this is really to just, if you want to unmute yourself, turn on your video and just ask a quick question. We do have a couple of minutes. So can anyone from the audience, does anyone have anything to ask from our officers today?
Yeah, I'm just hi Wyatt, it's Jamie. I'm just kind of curious for any or all the panelists, how often do you find you have to take punitive measures with your clients, and what do those typically look like? And if you're recommending revocation, is there a short-term option, or is revocation in your decision?
I guess I'll take that. That's a very loaded question, Jamie. You know, I would love to just answer that, but it's so varies on so many different things. I would say within the context of the reentry court, the measures, even the punitive measures kind of along the way were probably small, in the sense that we tried to have as minimal of an impact negatively on participants who were on that journey as we could. That wasn't always possible. We had to kick people out of the program. We had to revoke people and reincarcerate them during the program. But I would say those were far and few. It was a voluntary program. So anyone who was there, their probation officer did not make them be there. They were there because they wanted to be. And so we tended to get quite a bit of buy-in about what it would take for them to be successful. But like anything, you're going to have people who just want the benefit without putting in the work. And, you know, we were, I would say, quick to try to remove any of that, just because it tended to really negatively impact the program. But, you know, there definitely were situations where that did have to happen. I hope that answers.
Thanks for that question, Jamie. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts? Okay, perfect. Well, it looks like even with technical difficulties, we made it right on time. So I want to take a moment again just to thank Katrina, Jenny, and Jennifer for volunteering their time to talk to us today and really share everything about their experience in the collaborative courts. And a very special thank you. I mean, I've worked so closely with all of you for policy reasons, for client interventions, for improving our programs. And it's your insight and expertise that has really elevated the work that we're doing. So thank you so much to all three of you. And we'll go ahead and get this recording up on our sites to share with everyone. So thank you three again, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving week next week.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Thanks, Wyatt.